And now, live from the Infowars.com studios in Austin, Texas, it's your host, David Knight.
A lot of news today. We have a major change happening in the character of China. Of course, it's never been a democracy. It's never been a libertarian society. But it is going back to a hard control of a communist dictator, a guy who's trying to create a cult of personality, not just shutting down civil liberties, not just shutting down the internet and intimidating people, but there's a lot of intimidation going on here in America as well from the left. And of course, that's the push to censor what they call fake news. They get all excited about the fact that President Trump talks about fake news and says that licenses ought to be pulled, and yet we're seeing the same kind of proposals coming from the left. Who gets to decide what is fake news? Well, now there's a proposal from the former FEC chairwoman, Ann Revelle, who is now teaching at Berkeley, where else, saying that people she doesn't agree with, people that are creating what she calls disinformation or fake news, and I guess she will be the final arbiter of that, that will be labeled somehow on social media. And if you decide to ignore that label, they will further intimidate you by reminding you that if you share that information, or if you retweet that information on Twitter, that you could be liable to be sued for sharing false information. So we're going to talk about that in detail. Here are some of the other articles that we're going to be going over in detail. We have Chuck Schumer, who has written off $58,000 last year doing the tax deduction that he's trying to save. And of course, that's the deduction of income tax for people who live in high tax states like New York. We're also going to be talking about the issues going back and forth with President Trump and the Gold Star family. We have people on both sides of the issue weighing in on that. Quite frankly, I think there is something else here that people are missing. I'm going to tell you what's in that. We have a severe threat, says the acting director of Homeland Security. She says we may be having another 9/11 soon. Oh, of course, it's going to be coming from Al-Qaeda. It would not be a false flag, of course. A judge has ordered the Trump administration to let illegal alien here obtain an abortion. That's here in Texas. And of course, that would be paid for by you, the taxpayer. So anybody can come here from any country in the world. They can get a free education at taxpayer expense. Now they're going to be able to get a free abortion at taxpayer expense. One of the things that we had about DACA, I thought, was that it was, we shouldn't send these people back who are foreign citizens. We shouldn't send them back to their home country because they were brought here by their parents. They didn't have any control of that. Now, this minor has a child who is going to be brought into this world, brought into existence through no fault of her own, brought into this country through no fault of her own. But she's going to have not her residency terminated, but her life terminated. And we have a judge in the District of Criminals who is saying that that has to happen. We have another judge who is shutting down for the third time the border restrictions that President Trump has a legal right to, that the Supreme Court has affirmed, but that doesn't stop them from stopping the orders going through. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, we have a hospital that has blocked a father from donating a kidney to his 2-year-old son because of a parole violation. Talk about transferring the sins of the father to the child. People are lining up to offer their kidneys to this toddler who is in severe situation because the inflexibility of the criminal justice system. One of the individuals that we've talked to in recent weeks, Ty Levenger, who was going after Hillary Clinton, trying to get discovery, but also trying to get Hillary Clinton disbarred for the criminal actions that she committed, even though she wasn't prosecuted or even indicted for any of these. He is now trying to disbar Comey. You know, I mean, why shouldn't you be disbarred for committing perjury? And we know that he did. It was something that got Bill Clinton impeached. And, of course, Fusion GPS didn't commit perjury. They just repeatedly pledged the Fifth Amendment when they were forced to appear before the House Intelligence Committee. These are the people who created the fake Trump dirty dossier. We'll have all that news and more in detail when we return. I'm David Knight. Stay with us. Well, you thought you'd heard the last of Eric Holder, didn't you? But, of course, his name came up yesterday in the real Russian collusion investigation that has now resurfaced. The fact that he was on the committee with Hillary Clinton, Timothy Geithner, who is the head of the Treasury Department at the time, Of course, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, Eric Holder was Department of Justice, and they knew what was going on with the Russians who were trying to buy uranium-1 15 months before they approved it. They approved it anyway. So his name has come up again now as somebody who is getting involved in the Gold Star family controversy around President Trump. I'm David Knight, and we've got a lot of news here. Let's start, though, with Eric Holder, and let's start with this Gold Star situation. One of the things when I saw this, I thought, oh, this is not really going to get much traction. But unfortunately, when people criticize President Trump, he's got a thin skin, and he makes it a bigger deal than it should have been. This is clearly a political ploy by individuals, and I'm going to tell you what I think is behind it. But let's listen to Eric Holder first. Here's what he had to say.
Trump said that NFL players who take a knee should be suspended, that the league should suspend them. The NFL's declined recently to force players to stand during the national anthem, which the president this morning tweeted showed, quote, total disrespect for our great country. I believe you're a football fan and you have an opinion on this. What do you make of this controversy? And do you understand those who are offended when players take a knee during the anthem? There are a lot of, for instance, we were just talking about Gold Star families who feel it's offensive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, first, I think people, Gold Star families should not necessarily feel offended, because the purpose of those demonstrations was not to disrespect people in the military, not to disrespect the flag. These are players using their First Amendment rights to express views about the interaction between people in law enforcement and communities of color. That's what the stated purpose of the protest is. Now, having said that, they certainly have that right, but people certainly also have the right to react to the way in which they perceive, these protests. I think that these protests really offer us an opportunity for some dialogue, to talk about the underlying issue that the players were trying to raise. Let's talk about the way in which law enforcement interacts with certain communities in our country. If we do that, I think something positive can come out of this controversy. And I think, unfortunately, what the president's done here is to try to politicize something. He's trying to create
Eric Holder and Obama never politicized anything, did they?
There's really not the need. I think he could really do something positive with the controversy, and I think what he's chosen to do is to do something political.
Eric Holder, I think, has chosen to do something political. And let me tell you something. The reason he's speaking out here and not saying anything at all, he's basically sitting on the fence, isn't he? Well, on the one hand, they have a right to say something, and on the other hand, these other people who were offended, they have a right to say something. But they shouldn't necessarily feel offended by this. They have to understand that this is a Black Lives Matter issue, and it is really about creating a race war. They don't really mean to disrespect military families. They just want to create a race war here. Because if they really wanted to fix the problem, they would join together with white people to change the rules of the police, to take them away from the kinds of rules that are being pushed out of Washington by the Department of Justice under Attorney General Eric Holder. I mean, he doesn't want to accept any responsibility for the kind of shoot-first curriculums that are being taught now in state police academies. But that's coming from Washington, and that is coming from the Obama administration. So they created the problem, then they use the problem to create racial division. And they make sure that the problem's not going to get fixed because it's going to be simply about racial division. But there's something much deeper here. Because the reason that he's coming out with this, and the reason that he's bringing in and talking about Gold Star families, and not just the military, he's talking about Gold Star families. That's your clue of what he's really trying to do here. What he is trying to do is to basically pivot this as part of the discussions that are the attacks that have been taken against President Trump in wake of the comments that he made in terms of when he called the lady whose son had died in battle. And what he said was, that they took exception to, was, well, he knew what he was signing up for. Now, when I saw that, and I was going to talk about it yesterday, we ran out of time, and we've had a lot of people weigh in on this. We've had even a father who lost his son, a Gold Star father, and he said, my son knew what he was signing up for. Yeah, that is a key thing that people say. That's the evidence of a hero. It was John Wayne who said, courage is, or something to the effect that courage is being afraid but saddling up anyway. There is nothing heroic about just getting killed when you don't know what is going on. But if you are a fireman, for example, and you run into a burning building to save somebody, knowing the risk that you're putting yourself in, that's what's heroic. And so what President Trump was doing was saying something that I've heard many people say about the military, say about firemen, say about the police, that they put themselves in a line of work or they put themselves in a particular event that they knew was dangerous, and they signed up for that. That didn't just happen to them. They weren't, wasn't like the movie that Goldie Hawn was in, Private Benjamin, where she signed up for the military. She thought she was going to get vacations and education and all this kind of stuff, and then things got pretty rough for her, and she goes, wait a minute, I didn't sign up for this. No, these people knew what they were signing up for, especially if they signed up to be a Green Beret. And so when you look at a situation like this, they made this into a big issue. And you got some lady who looks like she wants to be a cross between Maxine Waters and Bella Abzug, wearing a cowboy hat everywhere she goes. She's looking for her 15 minutes of fame. She has totally politicized this. Now, Eric Holder comes in, and what he tries to do is to take this split that has happened with the NFL and people who are military, and they see this as a deep disrespect for everything that they do, a deep disrespect for people who have died, but for the military in general. But Eric Holder comes in and he tries to recapture those people and turn this whole NFL thing against Trump by using this latest event. That's what I believe is happening here. And it isn't going to sell. It isn't going to wash. You know, nobody, basically the NFL, if we want to call them that, that's what the NFL is right now. It's really the NFL. They don't have the courage to take a stand, quite literally. And you've got the NFL players and the owners who met a couple of days ago. It was on Tuesday. They all got together and they said, well, we'd like for people to stand. They should stand, but we're not going to penalize them, even though we have rules that say that they must stand. We're not going to enforce those rules. We'll only enforce the rules about product placement. We'll only enforce the rules when players in the Dallas Cowboys want to honor the police who were attacked by Black Lives Matter. No, we won't allow that. But we will allow the players to indirectly attack the police with their Black Lives Matter symbols by taking the knee. And understand that this is a radical, racist, Marxist agenda, that's who Colin Kaepernick is. His heroes have always been commies, not cowboys. And they say legal experts have wondered if any punitive charge would hold up in court. Of course it would hold up in court if they want to punish people. They have punished people for nothing. They've got all kinds of rules and regulations. They do have rules and regulations. We've read them to you. Those rules and regulations were probably put in 2009 when they started taking massive amounts of cash from the government to do a symbolic display of patriotism. And then when the cash dried up, so did the patriotism. But as we've talked about before in this whole conflict, an employer, when you're representing that employer, when you're wearing the uniform of that employer, and you're entertaining people, this is what the NFL, what Jimmy Kimmel doesn't understand. When we sign up to get tickets to go to a movie, or we get tickets to go to a play or to a football game, that is entertainment. And you don't expect in the middle of a play that the guy is going to basically drop out of character, turn to the audience, and start haranguing you about his own personal political beliefs. People would be upset about that, rightfully so, even if they shared those political beliefs. And now this is spreading. We've even got an Ann Arbor City Council members taking the knee during the Pledge of Allegiance. And these people are all white. I mean, they're sitting there. You've got 4 out of 9 people on the Ann Arbor, Michigan City Council taking a knee, protesting America. So it's like, if you don't like the flag, you don't like the Pledge of Allegiance, just leave. Nowhere to run to, nowhere to hide. And we got the acting head of Homeland Security and in the UK saying, expect another 9/11 style attack from Al-Qaeda. We got that news and more coming up in just a moment. Before we do, I want to tell you about some of the sales that we have at InfoWarsStore.com. This is what funds our program here and everything that we do here at InfoWars. We have Brain Force Plus. This is going to be the last week that we have this massive sale, 50% off, the deepest discount we've ever had off of Brain Force Plus. A great supplement, my favorite supplement. I take it every day. Helps to focus my mind. And, of course, as we say, it supercharges your brain. I've said before, I would have called it Brain Focus instead of Brain Force. But you can get Brain Force Plus, 50% off. You can also get, for a limited time, this will also be ending this week, Survival Shield X2 Nascent Iodine, 40% off. BioTrue Selenium, 40% off, and that's 100% non-GMO and 100% organic. It's made from organic mustard seed. And Secret 12, our vitamin B12 formula, that is also 40% off. All three of those, 40% off. And we have, for a limited time only, 20% off Infowars Wake Up America. That's in either the Patriot Blend or the Immune Support Blend. The difference between the two is that Immune Support has some natural mushrooms that are mixed into it to help to support your immune system. You can get those 20% off at checkout when you enter the code WAKEUP. Let's put in the code WAKEUP at checkout to get 20% off Wake Up America coffee, whichever blend you choose. Okay, we got Chuck Schumer. You know, the big issue with the tax reform bill that came out was whether or not people in high-tax states were going to be able to continue to deduct their income taxes against their state income taxes against their federal income taxes. And as we pointed out, it's the high-income individuals in these high-tax states like California and New York that are getting the big deductions. Here's Exhibit A, Chuck Schumer. He gets to write off $58,000 last year. And this is the tax deduction that he doesn't want to see go away, believe me. And neither do his high-income constituents. They want to talk about how this new tax reform, it hurts the middle class, it hurts the poor. No, actually, what it does is it's going to, we haven't seen the exact levels of where the rates come in, but it simplifies the code to have 3 different rates. And we'll need to see where those rates come in. That's what I think Rand Paul is saying. So where are you going to when do those rates fall? What income levels? But it simplifies the tax return by simplifying the number of rates. It brings the rates down in general, and it also doubles the standard deduction. So it takes away, as part of that standard deduction, it takes away the complication of people who itemize their expenses. That's something, especially with the state income taxes, it's something that high-income individuals do. But as the Daily Caller points out, Schumer wrote off $58,000 in state and local taxes last year. And to give you an idea of how this compares to the middle class that he says that he is so concerned their taxes are going to be raised, that's roughly equivalent to the median household income of $59,000 last year. So he's writing off what the typical household income is with this one tax deduction that he's fighting to keep. And as they point out, taxpayers, this is coming from the Tax Policy Foundation, they said taxpayers with income over $100,000 would have the largest tax increases both in dollars and as a percentage of income. Those taxpayers would pay 90% of the tax increase from eliminating the tax deduction on state and local income taxes. 40% of the total would be paid by just taxpayers with incomes over $500,000, and that would include Senator Schumer, whose income topped the $500,000 mark last year, according to his tax returns. Schumer has been a fierce opponent of the GOP plan to eliminate the deduction, which Republicans say rewards blue states with high income tax levels, like New York, where Chuck Schumer is. So here's a rich guy, Chuck Schumer, making over $500,000 a year, living in a high tax state. He's going to lose that deduction. But he's going to try to save it for himself, for his rich Democrat friends, and lie to you and saying that he's opposing this change because he wants to help the middle class. Yet his deduction is more than the median family income. As I pointed out at the top of the segment here, a severe threat, says the acting Homeland Security official. This is the acting U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security. She was in London, and her name is Elaine Duke. She says that terrorist organizations, whether it's ISIS or Al-Qaeda or others, want to have a big explosion like they did on 9/11. They want to take down aircraft. The intelligence is clear on that. Well, you know, we had people pushing back against the scanners that they put into airports, the things that the TSA did. And John Corbett did a lawsuit. He was an activist who was showing how ineffective it was over and over again. And he actually sued the TSA. And as part of that discovery, it was accidentally posted. Some of the documents were supposed to be heavily redacted, the documents that he had asked for in discovery. They were supposed to be heavily redacted, but the government made a mistake, and they posted those documents unredacted on the website that shows all the lawsuits that happen in the U.S. And so for a brief period of time, those unredacted the documents that he'd looked for were up. And we were able to see, and we reported here and screenshotted those at Infowars. And they were saying back in 2011, when they were threatening to make Texas a no-fly zone because we'd had the State House of Representatives say, you're not going to be manhandling children at the airport. We're not going to allow that. We're not going to allow the TSA to do that. We're not going to have to submit to that kind of treatment before we fly. And so at the same time that they were pushing back on that, and of course they got the lieutenant governor who had been before he got into oil and before he spent the most money anybody has ever spent to win state office, his name was Dewhurst. He was a longtime CIA intelligence official. And this guy led a rebellion against that bill in the Senate as the federal government was threatening to turn Texas into a no-fly zone. So at the same time, we learned from this lawsuit that the TSA said there is no threat against planes or airports. Absolutely no threat. They redacted that, but they made the mistake and they put the unredacted document up, and we got a shot of that. Meanwhile, we have the acting U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security say the threat is still severe. So yeah, it's still severe. Don't worry about that. We got to do everything we can to harass people at the airports. And I've got an update on all this talk about the real ID. You know, we've got a lot of people who are saying why residents in some states in America may need a passport in order to travel by plane domestically. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Of course, they put this law in under Bush back in 2005, and they've continued to give extensions to states who do not meet the standards for the new ID. And so you have to have not only a driver's license, but it's got to be a driver's license from somebody that has the right kind of vetting of you to make sure that this license is valid. Meanwhile, on the other side of this, we've got all these challenges in Texas and North Carolina. We got a judge who says anything that requires a photo ID to vote is targeting minorities with surgical precision. Why is that racist? And why is it that we have to have ID to fly and not to vote? I think that voting is far more dangerous than flying. You can do a lot more damage with that, and we have a lot of documented voter fraud. Stay with us. I'll be right back. I'm David Knight. We're going to have updates on all the stories that we've been following the last couple of weeks. Of course, update on the Vegas shooting and the appearance on Ellen DeGeneres by Jesus Campos after he disappeared. Some of the absurd things that have come out of that absurd interview. We're also going to have some updates on Harvey Wood and things that are tied to that. As Cynthia McKinney has said, it's going to be Hollywood, and then up next is the corruption and the sexual abuse that is coming out of politics in Washington. It's already started in California. And, of course, there have been a lot of raids lately where they have saved a lot of children who've been kidnapped, big pedophile rings. This is the 11th raid that has happened, and a lot of people have been arrested. A lot of children have been freed. Tomorrow, we're going to have an individual come on who is a producer of a film called Open Secrets. He's going to be here in studio. We're going to talk to him about his documentary on that very subject. But we're going to get to those in just a moment. Right now, I want to talk about a story that really hasn't gotten much exposure because of our focus on these events that have been happening in America, something that's going on in China. And we need to pay attention to what is going on in China. It's kind of interesting that on this 100th anniversary, it's this month, the 100th anniversary of the October Revolution in the Soviet Union. And don't forget that Vladimir Lenin was sent to start that revolution on a sealed train with $10 million in gold. That's $10 million in gold in 1917 dollars that he was sent in with. And he was sent there by bankers. He traveled from Switzerland into Russia to start that revolution. And in the same way, when we look at communist China, and folks, it is still communist China. They may have a veneer of capitalism, but that country is still being run by communists. And if you've got any doubt about it, just need to take a look at what Xi Jinping has been doing this last week. And of course, it was something that was also propped up by central bankers, by globalists. started with Nixon's opening to China. I mean, you even had Stephen Sondheim do a Broadway show about Nixon's opening to China. But it was Henry Kissinger. It was the globalists, the central bankers who were pushing that. They wanted some slave labor. They also wanted to change the balance of power away from the West. And they've done a great job of that. They really have eviscerated our economy. And so now we've got Xi, or as I like to call him, 11. I don't know why they put his name out as XI and pronounce it Xi. You know, Xi is the man, we could say. And of course, you know, who was on first? They had a president who, and he was on first. This is kind of like Abbott Costello, isn't it? But now Xi is the man, and Xi is essentially creating a cult of personality, and he is reviving the kind of strong policies that China had moved away from in order to get wealthy and powerful. He is now moving back to that. And so he's got big plans. He's got big plans of economic and military hegemony. He says, no, we're not going to dominate people. We're just going to be the #1 guys out there. But we're going to be benevolent dictators of the world. And you can take a look at how benevolent he has been as a dictator to his own people, if you want to believe that or not. But this is a guy with ambition. This is a strong communist dictator that has emerged from this meeting this last week. And just like any self-respecting communist party, they have a meeting every 5 years to come up with a 5-year plan. And they're going to centrally plan the economy. They're going to do it once every 5 years. They're going to take a look at it. So that's one of the reasons why communism fails. A marketplace has everybody who is making purchasing decisions in the marketplace. They're constantly making decisions, and they're constantly fine-tuning the marketplace with those decisions that they make. They're constantly voting, if you will. I mean, it's real democracy in a real marketplace, if you've got a real free marketplace, because people are constantly voting, and those votes, in terms of what they choose, are constantly being reflected. And if the businesses who are selling their services do not respond to the votes, and if they see that they are losing out and they don't respond by cutting their prices or improving their products or doing something in a real free market, then they're going to be eliminated, because there's this thing, they have to succeed based on profits. That's why capitalism always wins. And I don't like to say capitalism, because capitalism has gotten a bad name now, because we've had so much crony capitalism, which quite frankly is economic fascism. So I like to talk about a free market. Because whenever you got government regulation coming in, it starts taking us immediately away from a free market. And it starts taking us into crony capitalism. And it takes us into socialism and government control. But let's take a look at what Xi Jinping is doing in China. This is the 19th Communist Party Congress. They hold it every 5 years. Xi's allies will be promoted, his adversaries will be chastised, and Xi Jinping thought will be impressed upon China's future. So let's get into the mind of this dictator. He wants to have a doctrine that is named after him, so that's one of the key things, to know that this guy is falling into the trap of most dictators. Only Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping have done that before him. And you know, when we went to China to adopt my daughter, I was absolutely amazed. I mean, this is 10 years ago. I was absolutely amazed that they still had these massive banners up of Mao. And you could buy like little communist caps, and you could buy Mao's little red book at the marketplaces and everything. It's like, wow, I thought these guys had awakened. I thought they were moving toward a free market. And it's like, no, it's just a beard. It's just a beard. If you go back and, what was the name of that movie? It was Blast from the Past. And you go back and you look at the dad, and at the very end of the movie, you know, if you've seen that movie, they get trapped. He was a strident and anti-communist. He didn't trust the communists. And he built his own shelter. And one day when they're down in the shelter, this plane crashes and traps them there. And they think it's been a nuclear bomb. And so they stay in this shelter for like 20 years or something. And they come out. And so that's the Blast from the Past. That's the fish out of water comedy that they have. But at the very end, when they finally realize what had happened, somebody comes in and they say, yeah, you know, the Berlin Wall has come down and Russia's no longer communist. And he goes, yeah, right. And he starts pacing off another bomb shelter in the back. So when you look at what the Chinese communists are doing, and when you look at what's going on with the cult of Mao that is still alive and well, even though they were telling everybody they're moving towards capitalism, they just wanted to get rich. They just want to get powerful, and they're going to have to use capitalism to do that. Now they think they've got enough money and they've got enough power that they can now indulge their totalitarian fantasies, as they have been doing to their own people. As Breitbart reports, there's been some telltale signs of Xi's rising power. Repeated references to himself as leader, an honorific that was previously reserved only for Mao and his successor, a possible change in the formal title to party chairman, a position that nobody has held since the 80s. Becoming party chairman instead of being general secretary, his current title, would allow him to get past the term limits that are coming up in 2022. And one individual from the School of Oriental and African Studies in London told Reuters that Xi is now moving more in the direction of a king, saying, "I am China. I am the Communist Party." You get the drift? Okay, this guy is getting into some heady dictatorship stuff. Kind of sounds like the guy who opened up China, you know, when Nixon said, it's not against the law if the president does it. Okay, it's not illegal, right? South China Morning Post summarized his thought as this. They said, central to the new era. They always have a new era. Why is it that the communists always need a new era? It's because it's always failing, but it's always failing forward. Don't worry, we'll fix it with the next 5-year plan. We'll fix it with the new era. It's going to have 4 self-confidences. A need for China to have faith in its system, its path, its theory, its culture. Xi maintains that China needs to have confidence in its one-party political system and its traditional culture, as opposed to Western political ideas and values. Unlike Deng, who said some people could get rich first, Xi has now focused on the need for wealth redistribution. The next thing you know, he's going to have some kind of cultural revolution, isn't he? And he's going to start starving people like Mao did as part of the Cultural Revolution. We're going to talk a little bit more about this, a little bit more about his ambition, because this is very important. This is something that is going to affect your life. Part of their ambition is monetary. They want to take down the U.S. dollar, and it is a fiat currency that is ripe to be knocked over, and they want to do it. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're going to take a look at some of the pronouncements of the Chinese president at their Communist Party convention. You know, they're able to modify the Constitution there at the convention. Kind of like an Article 5 con, isn't it? Constitutional Convention. We don't want to have one of those. I'm David Knight. We're going to get back to that, and we are going to take a little bit deeper look at the plans and the designs of the now openly communist leader, President Xi. Before we do, real quickly, I want to remind you of some of the sales we have here. It's what funds this program, this operation, everything we do here at Infowars. BrainForce Plus, 50% off, the deepest discount we've ever had, and it's not going to last much longer. So take advantage of that. It's a great time to stock up or to even try it if you haven't tried it before. I think you're going to like it. It's my favorite supplement that we have here at Infowars. We also have some deep discounts on some very important supplements, important to your health. There's no question that you need sufficient iodine, selenium, B12. We have a great way to get all of those, and we've got them 40% off. Survival Shield X2, our nascent iodine formula, you can get that 40% off. BioTrue Selenium, no synthetics, no fillers. It is non-GMO, 100% organic, made from mustard seeds. Our BioTrue Selenium is also 40% off. And Secret 12, our vitamin B12 formula, which is a great way to get B12 without having to take injections. You just put it under your tongue, leave it there for 15 seconds, and it's great tasting, gets you the same effect as taking an injection without getting the shot. That is also 40% off, Secret 12. And we have 20% off Infowars Wake Up America coffee in either a Patriot blend or an immune support blend. Just enter the code WAKEUP at checkout to get 20% off Wake Up America coffee. That's the code WAKEUP at checkout. All right, we're looking at the things that are coming out, the new emerging dictator out of China. And, of course, we've seen a lot of moves that he has made to shut down freedom of speech and other things like that. His power has come at the expense of the liberty of the citizens there, of course, as always. And one of the things that they're saying here is it remains to be seen. This is somebody, the South China Morning Post, analyzing this and says, it remains to be seen whether or not his central decision-making organ will be able to make adequate policies for a diverse country. Of course they can't. That's why they have these 5-year conventions. Same thing that the Stalinists did All communists. I don't know what's so magic about every 5 years. I guess they figure it's a long enough time that everybody can forget the failed policies of 5 years earlier. It's like, don't worry, we're going to fix it now. But of course, that's the central problem with communism. The central problem is central planning. They don't know enough. They don't have enough information. They don't know how to allocate resources. A free market will always succeed better than they will. So the question is he going to move forward towards having a world-class military by 2050, as he points out, or are they going to move backwards into communism? That could be actually long-term good news. But one of the things that they're trying to do is they are trying to take down the petrodollar, the U.S. dollar, that has been propped up since we had the agreement with Saudi Arabia, propped up by Saudi Arabia and those who buy Federal Reserve notes, because it's simply a fiat currency. When we came off of the gold standard, we created the petrodollar. We said all energy, all oil, because that is energy, folks. The environmentalists don't want you to think that, but yes, that's where we get all of our energy, all of our affordable energy. Sorry, it comes from fossil fuels. They wanted to make the U.S. dollar the world reserve currency, as it had been after World War II. It became apparent that America was spending far more money than they had gold. They were printing more money than they had gold to back it up, so they stopped that and they moved to the petrodollar. Now we have seen moves from Russia, from China, from other organizations saying they're going to create competing currencies. They're going to create competing cyber currencies, and that's a real threat because that's something that governments don't have control of. So now the governments are trying to create government cyber currencies so that they can control it. But this is a direct attack on the fiat dollar. And if that collapses, that will be far more devastating than any kind of military moves that China could do. Nevertheless, he does have military aspirations. He wants a world-class military by 2050 that can fight and win wars across all theaters. All theaters. He wants to be a global superpower. Since becoming president and also chairman of the Central Military Commission, the CMC, in 2012, writes Breitbart, Mr. Xi has trimmed and rebalanced the traditionally land-based People's Liberation Army, the PLA. He's restructured its top leadership to reduce their clout and to centralize authority in himself. Again, a military dictatorship. This is the big brother of Kim Jong-un, is what we're talking about here. He even arrested 2 top generals who were vice chairman of the CMC for suspected corruption. He vows to modernize the army, and he is going to prevent other people from meddling in China's affairs. That's what he says here. He says he's going to modernize the army by 2035, and of course, he's going to have the world-class superpower military by 2050. He says no one should expect China to swallow anything that undermines its interests. He says it's time for us to take the center stage with both military buildup, economic hegemony, and other issues. And as the New Yorker points out, Xi has used his power to curb the power of his citizens. That's what these communist dictators always do. As they say, under his rule, China has become increasingly repressive. The media is censored. Civil society has been muted. Activists have been silenced. Human rights lawyers arrested. More than 1 million officials have been disciplined. Despite paying lip service to the Constitution, he is steering the country away from the rule of law and toward the rule of the party. That's why they have their party conventions. That's why he gets the honorary titles that are going to allow him to extend his reign there. And we've seen massive crackdowns in Hong Kong, one of the freest countries in the world, quite frankly. If you go back to the 1980s, you look at Milton Friedman's series, Free to Choose, he continually goes back to Hong Kong as an example of something, a place where people have freedom. And I have to say, it was really an eye-opening contrast. As I pointed out before, when we went to adopt my daughter in China, it was an eye-opening contrast to see mainland China and to see Hong Kong, to go back and forth between the two. There's been a lot of economic improvement since Mao in mainland China, but to go to Hong Kong and see how much more wealthy people were there, how they would respond to you. It's one of the friendliest cities I've ever been in, especially for a big city. And of course, one of the things that first struck us as we were traveling by train was to see that all of a sudden we saw crosses. And I thought, you know, that's funny. I hadn't seen any crosses in churches in China because there's massive repression of Christianity by the Chinese communists. Nevertheless, it thrives. The more they try to press down Christianity, the stronger it grows. And that's one of the big success stories of China as they try to repress free speech, as they make more central planning. They will see their power decline. And that's the reality of it. You know, one of the things that we still laugh about was my daughter, after she left the orphanage, she was older, and she was almost 5 years old when we adopted her. And she had, for about 6 months, been staying with a foster family. They didn't know that she was up for adoption. And when she left, the foster dad wrote this letter that the translator read to us. And part of it was to say, always obey your government, whatever they say. And the family looked at me, and I said, wrong family. They gave her to the wrong family for that to happen, and we all broke up laughing. But the thing about Hong Kong is that they got a taste of freedom, because the British government really didn't want to rule it. It had inherited this as part of the British Empire. They had a 99-year lease, which they didn't want to try to keep going, so they were eager to turn it over to China, to the Chinese communists. And everybody was worried at the time that they were going to extend their power and interfere with Hong Kong. And they have, as they've been trying to put this kind of personality cult, the worship of the Communist Party. It is infiltrating first and foremost into the curriculum of the schools, teaching the children. They want to get the children at an early age. Just like we see here, we had Bill Ayers leave the Weatherman and go into education. And all this stuff about white privilege, all this race war stuff, all this political correctness, all of this environmental alarmism, that is what they're using the schools for. They're not teaching Johnny to read. They're not teaching reading, writing. They're not teaching the kind of critical skills that you need to think independently. That's the last thing they want. They don't want you to think for yourself. They don't want you to have the tools to think for yourself. They want to propagandize you. And they did the same thing in Hong Kong. But when they did it in Hong Kong, when they started manipulating the textbooks, the people in Hong Kong took to the streets by the thousands, and tens of thousands, quite frankly. Massive protest. But of course, they have arrested people who are in the press in Hong Kong. They are asserting their authority and trying to shut down the freedom of one of the freest places on earth. And it's a shame to see it. But as I said, it is going to work to their detriment ultimately. But it may have some severe consequences in the meantime for the U.S. and our currency, especially. I'm David Knight. Stay with us. We're going to be right back with a news break.